Hi everybody, welcome to the last module in our course, Digital Preservation and Web Archiving. Digital preservation is the field of information management that ensures the continuity of electronically recorded information over time, making sure that important digital files, data structures, and electronic publications like websites remain accessible and reusable. Preservation activities include strategic planning, process management, and application of preservation methods and technologies. Because electronic storage media is extremely volatile, preservation naturally focuses heavily on technology management. Web archiving is a fairly recent preservation activity. In the last 23 years, websites have become primary publishing media, rivaling television and radio broadcasting in terms of their importance to mass communication. However, web technology is extremely ephemeral, and the savvy information manager needs to approach web archiving from both the front and the back end of each website to be saved. This week, we will look at the field of digital preservation in general and focus in particular on how to successfully archive websites. You'll get to work with some simple but effective software tools that can be used to create basic web archives. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the online lecture for Module 8, Digital Preservation and Web Archiving. As we've seen in earlier lessons this semester, digital information can be valued in a variety of ways. For example, digital data can have both immediate value and value for the long term. Thus, it is both right and necessary that as information managers, we commit some percentage of our time and resources to ensuring that the digital files we manage are available to those who will need them in the future. Unfortunately, the world of digital information in which we live has forced the issue of preservation into fairly rude focus. Digital information by its nature is extremely fragile and volatile, and it requires special efforts to keep it viable and in a usable state for a span of longer than just a few months. Well, let's start talking about digital preservation by recognizing that it has 7 basic challenges that every information manager has to face. And we'll review these a little more in depth, but they include the entry requirements, meaning how does one spend money or time engaged in developing digital information plans, tools, and methods? Metadata and documentation requirements. What information do we need to have with the information we're preserving so that people who use the data in the future understand the context of the data that they're viewing? Third is technological obsolescence. As you well know, technology goes out of date within months or within 1 or 2 years of the release of a new device or platform. So how do we keep up with being able to access content that was produced on older technology without spending a lot of money preserving this antiquated technology in the future? Fourth is that storage media that we use today, whether it's magnetic disk storage, flash storage, other kinds of storage technologies, they do not last for very long in the grand scheme of things. So we're talking about needing to move our electronic data from old to new storage media pretty frequently and many times during our careers. The next one is corruption. Because storage media degrades, because people don't save the information that they produce properly or in the correct formats, because a variety of things can happen to the hardware that you're using to try to retrieve old data. Data can become corrupt, and sometimes it can be repaired, and a lot of times it can't be. So it's always an ever-present risk. Which goes without saying that all of the computer systems and tools that we use right now, both for creating information and for trying to preserve it, are imperfect, and they're not likely to be perfect anytime in the future. So we have an ongoing battle with the digital tools and media that we work with on a daily basis in trying to make sure that they keep our data safe over the long term. And the last one is that digital preservation is not usually an activity that a business or government agency plans for on a daily basis. We do know that businesses and government and educational agencies sometimes are mandated to preserve information, and it's unfortunately mostly the case when there's some sort of legal dispute going on with that organization and there's a legal order to preserve information. But on a daily basis, even the federal government, which is heavily involved in preserving government information for the long term at a strategic level, doesn't have tremendous plans for individual workers and contributors to prepare their data to be saved long term on a daily basis. So let's take a look at some of these challenges in a bit more detail. Well, in both librarianship and in information management, information science, digital preservation is a comparatively new field, and we're sort of right at the beginning of conceptualizing how digital preservation is best enacted for the benefit of an organization. So there's a lot of documentation available at different levels, but frankly, a lot of the documentation itself is going to go out of date within a few years from now. So what we're going to focus on today are more concepts of digital preservation, and these will be helpful regardless sort of what the platforms and the technical requirements we have to follow to ensure our data is saved long term in the future. Now, digital preservation does cost money, whether you're just preserving your own personal data files or whether you are working to preserve your data at your place of work. Now, how much money it costs will vary greatly. So with planning and with some awareness of tools that are free or low cost, which we'll cover in this lecture, the costs can be mitigated quite a bit. And you can store a lot of data pretty well for, say, 5 to 10 years without extreme costs burdening your organization. Let's talk about documentation requirements. So it's not enough just to save the data that's important to your organization, because we know that the context of that information will often get lost fairly quickly after the active use life cycle period of that information has expired. I mean, if we go back just in our own personal archives and you look at documents that you created a long time ago, and even ones that you spent a long time and put in a great deal of effort to create, sometimes you can't remember just off the top of your head what the reason was for creating that information. So we need to include some sort of documentation. Now, this is also called preservation metadata. We include this documentation along with the data to be saved, and the documentation contains a summary of the information and what the value is of that information, and maybe what its relationship to other information is. Now, this can be done very informally, and that's a good place to start. So if for every batch of documents you preserve, you create a little README file to go with those documents to say, well, these are all the files that were required for last year, the 2016 annual report. Here's the list of them, and provide any explanatory information about who made them, why they were written with the perspective they had, etc. That's a good place to start. Now, for organizations that have more formal digital preservation strategies, using a standardized metadata standard is important because they are going to be saving large amounts of information and need to be able to query the metadata to find the proper information in the future to be restored. So two standards that are used by the Library of Congress and a lot of academic institutions, both for library and research purposes, are called PREMIS and METS. You will see references to these in the literature about digital preservation. They aren't used as much in the private sector, but in any public sector organization, you're going to come across these two standards. We won't go into them in great detail today because they're very complicated, and we'd need actually a separate learning module just to cover the basics of each metadata standard. Technology obsolescence is something that not only plagues the information manager, but it sort of plagues all of us, in that after a few years of using a specific device, say your current model of smartphone, your laptop, your home PC, within just a couple of years, you're not going to be able to find software that still runs on these devices. The data formats may expire, and new devices may be using completely new formats. This is certainly the case with a wide variety of different types of media, everything from word processing file formats to streaming media, audio and video formats. So oftentimes, it is actually necessary to save old hardware to make sure that you can run it in the future, and that in case you need access to the data you're preserving and can't extract that data or access that data through the devices you'll be using in a few years. So saving the hardware and software that you create data with today and saving that for the future is a good way to help ensure that you'll always have access to that data. Now, sometimes, of course, in the future, the older technology that you save is going to become unusable. So hard drives are going to fail. Computer systems are going to fail. So while we want to be able to access data in the future in the original format that it was created, sometimes we have to convert data into new formats. So in addition to saving your obsolete hardware and software, part of the preservation activity that will consume some of your time will be converting data into new formats that appear several years from now. Now, a little bit of the burden of saving old hardware and software can be mitigated a little bit through the use of emulation software. So you have seen the articles in Popular Technology and in the newspaper talking about different virtual servers or virtual operating systems that you can run that will give you access to older software. So on the Windows platform, this is fairly sophisticated, and you can actually rely on it a good bit for accessing data that was created in software that won't run anymore. So for example, if you had a copy of Office 95 running on Windows 95 back in the mid-90s, and there are some versions of files in Microsoft Office that won't open with today's version of Microsoft Office. If you save the Microsoft Office software, you can get a free Windows 95 emulator package from Microsoft that you can run on any machine that will run Windows, almost any machine at least, and then you will be able to install and use the Office software from 1995 to open your files and then be able to transfer them into a file format that is available to us today. So emulators can help us a lot with the cost and the burden of having to save old hardware platforms in terms of preserving data for the future. So typically the media that we store data on in the past few years has been transitioning from traditional magnetic storage media into solid state flash storage media. Now, pretty much anymore, if you buy a new laptop or desktop computer, one of the main options you're going to get is to have a solid state hard drive installed on that machine. And the outlook is good for solid state media going forward into the future, that solid state hard drives will last longer than the old magnetic and mechanical data storage drives of the past. But there's still a lot of magnetic storage media around. So if you have a MyBook that's just even a couple years old, it's probably a mechanical drive with moving parts and has a traditional magnetic storage media disk on it. Now those old magnetic disks, they only last under good conditions about 10 years. Sometimes you can get them to last longer, but for the most part we see that failure of magnetic drive that's well made is about 10 years. And once they fail, it's very expensive to try to extract the data off of them. So it's worth it to migrate all of the data you're storing on old magnetic drives to new solid state drives, or at least to inexpensive CD or DVD discs. So discs are getting kind of antiquated because we access information online and through solid state drives so much anymore, including little thumb drives, flash drives, as well as larger solid state drives. But there's still a cost benefit to maintaining data on a copy of your data on a disk-based storage media, so CD or DVD. If you treat those disks with care and you keep them out of the light and extreme hot or cold temperatures and keep them away from magnetic interference and other issues in the environment that might affect them, they can last 20 to 30 years. So we're seeing that original CD discs that were produced in the late 80s are still viable today if we treat them properly. Now, like I said, solid state drives are what we prefer today to put our data on. We don't know how long those are going to last into the future because they're too new. So solid state drives that you use for your personal or work data need to be monitored, tested, and refreshed at least at a 5-year interval right now. Now, hopefully, as we get to 10, 15, 20 years out, we'll see how well those solid state drives really are performing in terms of saving data for the long term. But until we have rock solid evidence that those drives are going to last, you need to monitor them and make sure that you copy data off of them within between a 5 and 10 year period after the data was originally stored on the drives. One of the great problems with digital data is that it corrupts easily. We've all had that experience where maybe something happened, your PC gets shut off by accident right in the middle of editing a file, and then when you go back to the file, you can't open it or you can't access all of the data you thought you had stored on the file. There's also issues with downloading or transferring data across networks to where interruptions in the network connectivity can cause corruption. So we need to periodically test all of our data files, both to make sure that they haven't been inadvertently accessed and corrupted, but also that after we move them from one network location to another, and also if we're storing them on older types of magnetic storage media, we need to periodically test the viability of those files to make sure that we know that they are still uncorrupted and can be used. Now, we won't spend a whole lot of time on it today, but there's a way to extract a digital signature off of any data file. There are a couple of standards that are used for preservation today. There's an MD5 standard, and that's what we use here at UNM. And then there's a SHA-1 or SHA-1 standard. Basically, you use a software application and you point that software application at a folder full of files. And then the software will look at the files and it will generate a unique signature, which is an alphanumeric string of characters, and save that unique signature in a data file. And then you save the data file, and in the future, when you need to check against your saved data to make sure that it's hasn't been corrupted yet, you use that same software application and you review that same folder of files against the old digital signatures. And if there's a change in the signature, there's a good bet that the files have been corrupted. If there's no change in the signature, that means the files still have good integrity. So the best way to ensure against data corruption is to always maintain good data management procedures, making sure that you copy and move files with care, that you don't let people access your archived data files unless there's an absolute emergency. And then you also need to check the digital signatures of your data periodically. I would say here we do that every once a year, but I would say every 1 to 5 years to make sure that the files haven't been corrupted in some way in the future. Now, if you are working for a larger organization, you can purchase software to help manage your digital files and preserve them. In fact, digital preservation systems are an actual IT market niche. However, if you're just getting started or you have a small organization with a limited budget, you can use a variety of free tools to help capture and preserve information. And also, you can simply use some of the procedures, the human-based procedures we've talked about in this lecture, to maintain your data on good storage media and to check the media periodically to make sure that it hasn't become corrupted. So one of the problems with using a digital preservation system, however, is that like all other kinds of software, those systems are going to become obsolete. The formats and standards that they support will become obsolete. So there's benefits in terms of using a digital preservation system, in terms of being able to automate a lot of the procedures we've talked about. But they're still expensive, and there's still issues involved in running this software, in that it will be an ongoing expense to maintain the software as well as maintain your data archives. So unless you are managing information at a large enterprise level, starting off with manual human-based processes are the best way to go. Now, whether you're using an automated system to preserve your data or you're simply maintaining good data management practices, planning is important to preserve data for the future. So everyone should have a basic digital preservation plan at their organization. And there are a couple of components that need to be included in that plan. The first is, what data are we going to save? So are we going to try to save all email produced at the organization, selected email, no email? Are we going to save all documents or just documents that are in their final state and published form? And this, of course, depends on what your preservation needs are and what you may need to access in the future. Then determining who is going to perform the preservation activities, who is responsible for making sure data files are captured and saved off into a data archive, who is responsible for maintaining the data archive systems as well as the data. How long are you going to try to preserve the data? And at what intervals do you plan to check your data archives to make sure they have not been corrupted? Now, the NEDCC organization has an excellent digital preservation policy uh, template that you can use for just about every different kind of organization. And the URL is there to access that toolkit. Now, archiving websites is something that is even newer as a preservation activity than the overall concept of saving uh, data files is for the overall field of digital preservation. Web archiving is important because websites are very ephemeral and websites are modified continually from the day that you put your organization's website into service. It's going to be modified hundreds and thousands of times. And over the years, you're going to lose the original appearance and the original structure and the original data files that were on your website. So if you have any interest at all in making sure your website is preserved over time, you need to include web archiving as one of your digital preservation activities. Now, there are a whole bunch of tools that you can use to do this. Certainly, the easiest way to preserve your website is to put an appointment notice on your calendar every year or every 6 months, however frequent you want to save the website, and just go talk to your systems administrator and have them download an entire copy of your website and save it off to a disk. Now, sometimes that isn't an option for us, especially in large organizations where maybe systems administration of your organization's website is managed by somebody in a department that you don't have easy contact with. Also, just saving the website files itself doesn't always preserve how a website looked in a specific browser, at a specific time. So there are software that we can use to actually scrape the web pages and save what they look like. There's also software we can use to back up the website behind the scenes. And a comprehensive web archiving program is going to do both of those activities equally, saving the front end and the back end of the website. Now, the first inadvertent preservation tool for the World Wide Web was invented in 1994 and is Brian Pinkerton's Lycos web crawler. And the interesting thing about web crawlers is that they download the contents of a page and save it into a database. So you can use a crawling tool even today to capture data that's published on the web and save it for later access. Now, the Internet Archive, which we've all heard of, uses a kind of web crawler that not only captures the content of the website, but actually captures the appearance of the website and is smart enough to be able to reconstitute both the content, the data content, as well as the appearance of every web page that it saves. And I got ahead of myself there. So yes, traditional web crawlers only capture the data on the page, each page of a website, and they'll save the URL to that website, but they won't actually save necessarily all the graphics or the formatting files cascading style sheets, etc., that control the visual appearance of the website. So these are good if you just need to be able to capture and save the information that's on each web page, but not if you want to see what the website looked like in the past. Now, web scraping tools and data extraction tools are able to pull additional data off of a website. For example, this here is the web content extractor made by NeoProSoft. And it can actually pull apart a web page and reconstitute it almost in the exact visual configuration that it appeared on a page. But oftentimes, web pages themselves are not static. They are actually, when you access a web page, you're actually running a database query. So a data extraction tool can also pull out the data from the database on a website and can save enough information so that you can see what each page looked like when retrieving that data from a data-driven website. Web scrapers can also pull the visual appearance of a web page and within reason can reconstruct them. So the Internet Archive, great example of a system that does its best to reconstruct, to save website data from the past and then reconstruct what that website looked like in the past as well. It's not 100% accurate for a variety of reasons, but it's the best way that we have to, through automated means, capture the visual appearance of websites that we want to save. Now, of course, probably the one way that you can ensure you get the 100% accurate visual appearance of a website is to use a screen capture tool and go and capture every page. There are tools that will do that with some automation, but they take a little bit of training to use and implement well. Now, for larger organizations, there are web capture and web archiving services. The best known of them is called Archive.it, and it is a subscription service offered by the Internet Archive. And using it, you can point your Archive.it subscription service at any set of websites, and you can capture them, both their visual appearance, the data behind them, and the back-end information about the website that you captured. And Archive.it will even capture things like embedded files, Shockwave or Flash or HTML5, interactive animation, streaming audio and video, attached files such as PDFs or other documents that you want people to download from your website. So the Internet Archive is expensive, but it also will save all of the data off of a website for you into an archive, and you can use that archive to reconstitute the data and the appearance of the website anytime you want. And here's just a couple of screenshots from the UNM instance of Archive.it. where we've actually, if you look at the URLs on the screenshot in the middle of the page there, we show a list of websites that need to be accessed, and then the bottom screenshot shows some of the configuration we can set on how often we're going to capture updates from those websites and put those all into an archive archive. And then, as I mentioned, archive it does capture enough of the data off of a website to be able to reconstruct what it looked like visually, as well as the data that was on each page. And here's an example of an arts website from Peru that was captured. You see that the website itself is in fairly good condition, that ArchiveIt has done a good job of reconstituting the page and with its graphics and links and everything. And then there's a little yellow banner up at the top of the page that informs you that you're not looking at a live website, but you're looking at an archived website that's being served out of a database. Now, if you have a small organization, or if you just want to save your own personal website, one option you can try is to go to the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine, and you have to use the URL there, archive.org/web, to get to the Wayback Machine homepage. But if you notice inside the red box, there's an option where you can paste a URL into the Wayback Machine front page and save it. Now, there's some caveats. The Wayback Machine can't save every type of web page, and it will not save duplicates for you. But you will be able to look up, if you're successful, you will be able to come back and after you save a page and look up with the URL for that page, the archive in the Wayback Machine. So this is a good way at no cost to you to save your own web pages or your organization's web pages using Internet Archive technology. One of the detractors to this technology is that there's often a delay time between when you paste your URL in that little box and click Save Page and when the Internet Archive actually gets around to archiving your page. So that could be days, weeks, months. And it's imperfect, but it doesn't cost anything. Now, the Internet Archive engine is a crawler engine called Heritrix that's been around a long time. And the Internet Archive has developed and improved it over the years. So the same technology that the Internet Archive overall preservation program uses, by using the Save Page Now option, you can take part in that same technology for your own websites. Now let's take a look at a couple of tools, and these will be on the list for your assignment. Most of them are going to be on the list for your assignment. We are going to talk about some fee-based tools, but there is a small variety of tools that you can use to archive websites for your organization, with the exception of things like the Wayback Machine that we just looked at. Most of these you're going to have to download software and then run the software on a server at your organization. And then you're going to have to manage the storage for the web data that these applications save off of the web for you. So you will have to have a server, data storage, and You will have to have enough system administration skills, or you'll have to be able to work with a system administrator to set these up and run them at your organization. Now, the first one, as we talked about, is actually a subscription service. That's Archive It. And it is fairly pricey to use the service, but it gives you end-to-end web preservation tools, and the Internet Archive will save the data for you, so you don't have to have local storage to keep your web archive data on. But again, that web archive, you can download it once you pay for a subscription fee, but it only lasts really as long as your subscription lasts to the Archive It. Now, the free option to get Internet Archive technology is to download the Heretics crawler software, and it does require a skilled systems administrator to set it up and help you manage it. So while it's free and open source, you're going to have to spend some time in training yourself on using it and managing the server that it runs on at your organization. Another web crawling application that a number of folks use for web archiving is called Methanol, and that's also free and open source. And then there's one other called the Net Archive Suite that you can use. Again, these all require some systems knowledge to set up and run. Now, if you just want to archive a personal or organizational website yourself, you can use some of these desktop tools. And I say desktop, although a couple of them are web-based, but they're really personal level tools that can be used to archive a specific site for your own purposes. So NeoProsoft is a company that makes several web archiving and data extraction tools. The Visual Web Spider is a desktop crawler. It will crawl and it will extract all of the text data off of a website for you. It will not extract data from a website that's driven by a database, however. So it will only extract sort of static web page content for you. But it's very fast and it's very easy to use. Now, if you want to extract data from a database-driven website, then you can use Web Content Extractor. And I've had excellent luck using that tool for pulling, for example, data off of a library catalog website. It's a little more expensive, but the Web Content Extractor will go out to your website, query the website for a record. It will scrape the content off of the website. It can reconstruct some basics on your page, from your page. And it saves all of that information into a little Microsoft Access database, which is very handy. A Web Curator tool is available free and on the web at sourceforge.net. It also will predominantly just pull text data off of a website. Website is a free service. You do have to input your name and email address, and it will send you your citation information. But it actually creates a permanent citation, annotated citation of a website, and it stores those in a database of its own. So that's an interesting tool as well. And then we already covered the Wayback Machine, which is a nice way to be able to use Internet Archive technology for your own website. Here are some resources on digital preservation for those of you who would like to read up more on this for your job or for your own professional development. Library of Congress has a really wonderful digital preservation site there. I tend to refer all my students to it for the basic concepts of digital preservation. And there's a workshop that the Library of Congress gives on digital preservation, and they've actually made the curriculum of the workshop available online. There's a British organization that has developed a comprehensive and systematic view of what preservation looks like within the contemporary public or private organization today, and they have an immense online handbook of digital preservation. It does start out with basic concepts, but moves very quickly into larger issues, and it covers both technology and policy issues. So if you're going to go be in the field of digital preservation for us, a significant part of your job duties, that would be the reference guide to take a look at. And then there's also a book, 2011 Advanced Digital Preservation, that is available online, I think through Amazon, that talks about concepts above just basic digital preservation that we've talked about in this workshop. Okay, so let's review our module here a little bit. There are 3 assigned readings. Be sure you read the Wikipedia list of web archiving initiatives. This might give you some ideas for the assignment this week, but it's a comprehensive article with the most current information I've found about institutions who have digital preservation initiatives, what technologies they are using, whether they are available, those web archives or digital preservation archives are available on the web to the public, and also specifically what standards and practices each of these initiatives use to preserve their data. Now, the weekly assignment is I've given you a list of free web archiving tools that you can use, and I'd like you to pick your own personal website or a website that relates to either your work or to your academic program, and use one of these free tools on that website to see if you can extract data off of it. So included on that list are the NeoProSoft tools and some of the web-based tools. What I'd like you to do is download the tool, learn how to use it, practice on it a couple of times, and then do one sort of formal archiving session where you point it at a website of your choice, pull down the data, and then write a short report on it. Specifically in the report, you want to discuss how easy was the tool to learn and use, whether you got good or bad results, and also how the tool, if you have time to compare a couple of tools, how that tool compares to other web archiving tools. I would like you to try to get some sort of data extraction using one of the tools, and not just write the report saying that you tried and it didn't work. I also need to remind everybody next week is finals week. Be sure you use this week to finish up all your regular assignments that are coming due. That way you can just use next week for your to work on your final project. Now, I will be out at a conference Monday through Wednesday next week, and my access to email is going to be delayed. So you may want to ask me any questions that are burning about your final project before Friday this week. Otherwise, I will pledge to check my email as regularly as possible, but there may be some delay between Friday and Wednesday next week. And final projects do need to be turned in Saturday, December 16th at midnight. That's really the last minute before I need to grade them. So I've given you as much time as possible. So ask me any questions you have about the final project soon. I will be available at the end of next week for questions about the project, but you should have already gotten through the instructions. All of the instructions are available in the final project module on the course website. So as always, if you need help or have questions, you can email me, give me a call this week, Monday through Friday, and I will answer as quickly as possible. Friday through Wednesday next week, I'll be at the conference, and so my response time might be delayed. So thanks, everybody.